Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che, here to provide you with the latest. Let us begin with the headlines. President Park Geun-hye at the East Asia Summit once again calls for united efforts against growing North Korean threats. Military leaders from more than 30 countries gather in Seoul for an annual defense dialogue. The key subjects: North Korea issues and the South China Sea disputes. Things get even tougher for Hanjin once Korea's biggest shipper. Its creditors refuse new funding without collateral from Hanjin's parent company. Let us begin with breaking news in the Laotian capital of Vientiane, where the East Asia Summit has just ended minutes ago. The 10 ASEAN member nations, together with Korea, Japan, China, the United States, Russia, India, Australia, and New Zealand, adopted a joint non-proliferation statement condemning North Korea's continued nuclear provocations. In her speech at the summit, President Park Geun-hye stressed the gravity of North Korean threat, saying it's a matter of life and death for South Korea. And if the international community fails to curb Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions, there will come a day when the world will regret it. Likely referring to the deployment of the U.S. missile defense system known as THAAD. President Park said it's a minimum of self-defense and the root of the issue is North Korean threats. In a chair statement earlier Thursday, ASEAN member states said Pyongyang must observe UN Security Council resolutions and voice their support for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Meanwhile, President Barack Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor says Washington may reconsider deploying THAAD to Seoul if North Korea scraps its nuclear missile programs. Park Jong-hong sheds light on the highly unlikely scenario.
The United States would be willing to think twice about deploying THAAD on South Korean soil if North Korea abandoned its development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. This is according to Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes. He made the remarks at a press conference in Laos when asked if there were any circumstances under which the missile defense system would not be deployed. Rhodes stressed the deployment is solely intended to counter North Korea's threats. But he said the U.S. hasn't seen any signs North Korea intends to change its ways in light of the regime's recent launch of 3 ballistic missiles into waters near Japan. He also said Washington would not reconsider the THAAD deployment just because China and other countries more strictly implement sanctions against the North. In addition, he pitched the need to focus more on the sanctions as North Korea may find ways to bypass them.
So we have to be very vigilant in sanctions enforcement, and we have to maintain the sense of urgency among the international community.
In the wake of Pyongyang's latest missile launches, the U.S. Special Envoy on North Korea will visit South Korea and Japan in the coming days. The State Department said Ambassador Sung Kim will meet with his counterparts from September 10th to the 13th in Tokyo and then Seoul. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
The annual Seoul Defense Dialogue has opened for a 2-day run in the South Korean capital. The main topics of conversation are North Korea's nuclear program and the disputes in the South China Sea. Kim Yeon-bin tells us more.
The Seoul Defense Dialogue 2016 kicked off on Thursday with military leaders from 34 countries and 5 international organizations taking part. Topping the agenda is regional and international security issues involving North Korea's nuclear program and maritime disputes in the South China Sea. During the dialogue, South Korean Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn emphasized the importance of a nuclear-free peninsula.
Our government, the UN and the international community need to put strong sanctions and pressure on Pyongyang so it will go down the path of denuclearization.
The first plenary session on Thursday focused on the denuclearization of North Korea and how to enhance international cooperation on the issue. The participants assessed North Korea's growing nuclear threats, UN Security Council resolutions on Pyongyang's nuclear program, and how the framework of the Iranian nuclear deal could be applied to the regime.
We should unite and show our strong determination that North Korea's nuclear and terror acts are unacceptable. If Pyongyang doesn't change course, we should make it known they will suffer severe consequences.
Also on Thursday, South Korea's Defense Minister Han Min-gu held talks with the chief of the organization for the prohibition of chemical weapons to discuss cooperative measures to prevent Pyongyang's possible use of chemical and biological weapons. On Friday, the final day, The plenary session will focus on maritime security cooperation, discussing crisis management on the South China Sea issues. However, Beijing is not taking part in the forum this year, as a protest against Seoul's recent decision to deploy the U.S. Advanced Missile Defense System THAAD to the peninsula. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Part of the latest U.S. strategies to pressure Pyongyang may include providing unrestricted and inexpensive electronic mass communications to North Koreans to help them see the wider world and their place in it. Connie Kim explains how feeding outside information to North Koreans could be effective in that respect.
The U.S. State Department has submitted a report to Congress on ways to help North Koreans gain greater access to outside information as part of its plans to mount further pressure on the regime. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker said Wednesday the report was submitted last week to both the Senate and House Foreign Affairs committees. The report was required under the North Korea Sanctions and Policy Enhancement Act signed by U.S. President Barack Obama in February. The document reportedly includes a detailed strategy to provide, quote, unrestricted, unmonitored, and inexpensive electronic mass communications to North Koreans. South Korea's foreign ministry said it does not know the details of the report, but described the impact outside information can have on the North Korean people.
When outside information gets into the north, it can cause shockwaves in the society as it's a closed regime. In fact, looking at the surveys conducted among North Korean defectors in the south, information from outside can influence their perceptions on South Korea.
To counter North Korea's continued nuclear provocations, Washington is cornering Pyongyang by putting sanctions on the regime and listing Kim Jong-un on the U.S. sanctions list for human rights abuses. The U.S., with its allies, is expected to continue its pressure on the North to denuclearize, with Seoul and Tokyo considering a trilateral foreign ministers meeting on the sidelines of the UN plenary session later this month. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Corporate restructuring in South Korea's troubled shipping and shipbuilding industries is picking up steam. This comes while the once mighty Hanjin Shipping appears unlikely to receive financing from its creditors. Shin Se-min sheds light on the unwelcome wind of change blowing in these sectors.
Korea's Finance Minister Yoo Wil-ho said the government has to stick to principle when dealing with companies in Hanjin's situation and go ahead with its corporate restructuring drive. In Parliament Thursday, the finance minister added that government can't even let such companies go into court receivership because the government can't keep throwing taxpayers' money to help normalize their businesses. And more bad news for Hanjin Shipping. Industry sources say its main creditor, the state-run Korea Development Bank, is unlikely to extend more credit to the shipper without collateral from its parent group. A local court had asked for the creditors to lend money for Hanjin's outstanding bills, which are holding up cargo shipments worldwide. But even a $90 million pledge from the Hanjin Group chairman himself wasn't enough to convince lenders to open their wallets. In fact, they said that's far shy of what Hanjin needs to operate normally. Alongside the government's corporate restructuring drive, the finance ministry has laid out plans to downsize the shipbuilding industry. By 2018, the government will push to cut facilities by 20% and manpower by 30% at Hyundai Heavy Industries, Samsung Heavy Industries, and Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering. This will trim oversupply and leave the overall size of industry at the level of two major firms based on current capacity. Finance Minister Yoo Wil-ho said that it will consistently push through the industry overhaul, adding that the next 2 years will be vital in breathing new life into the economy. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Shin Gyeong-ko, the founder of Korea's fifth largest conglomerate Lotte Group, is grilled by prosecutors over allegations of tax evasion and creating slush funds. Due to his weakened health, though, the questioning was done at his own office in downtown Seoul. Hwang Ho-jun has the details.
The subpoena originally ordered him to appear before the prosecution on Wednesday. A day later, prosecutors went to Lotte Hotel in downtown Seoul, where Shin Gyeong-ko's personal office is located, to interrogate him there. The interrogation is expected to only last for 2 to 3 hours. Officials had met with Shin and his physician the day before to check on the 93-year-old's physical and mental health. It was just last week the South Korean court appointed a law firm as the Lotte founder's legal guardian due to what it called his diminished mental capacity owing to his poor health and old age. According to his spokesperson, Shin denies all allegations of tax evasion, saying he only ordered his employees to reduce his tax liability, not evade what he owed, and that he would, quote, pay if anything has been omitted unlawfully. The prosecution has been investigating the scandal since early June over allegations Shin evaded some $550 million in taxes while handing over stocks to his family members, including his eldest daughter Shin Young-ja and his third wife Seo Mi-kyung. The prosecution has also said it's in the process of revoking the passport of his wife, who's currently living in Japan. That will likely prompt the Japanese government to deport her back to Korea so the case can be investigated further. If Seo continues to evade the proceedings, prosecutors will then look into issuing an arrest warrant and request her extradition. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
A sitting South Korean governor was convicted Thursday of taking bribes, receiving an 18-month jail term. If the sentence is upheld, he'll lose his post. Park Jo-won has more on the case of Hong Joon-pyo.
South Gyeongsang-do Province Governor Hong Joon-pyo was convicted Thursday of violating the Political Funds Act. The Seoul Central District Court handed down an 18-month jail term to the 61-year-old politician for taking bribes worth some $90,000 from now deceased businessman Hong Wan-jong back in 2011. The court said, however, the governor won't be put under immediate court custody, considering that he is a sitting governor. Governor Hong called the verdict absurd and promised to appeal. Under the Public Official Election Act, elected officials sentenced to jail or fined in excess of around $900 lose their posts. That will apply to Governor Hong if the verdict is confirmed by the Supreme Court. The case goes back to April last year when businessman Hong Wan-jong killed himself, leaving a suicide note listing names of 8 high-profile politicians and officials that he allegedly bribed with the amount of money that he had given them. After a months-long special investigation, prosecutors indicted 2 out of the 8 politicians listed, Governor Hong and former Prime Minister Lee Wan-gu, the latter quitting his post amid the scandal. The former Prime Minister was sentenced to 8 months in jail and 2 years of probation. Lee appealed the verdict and will get a verdict on his appeal at the end of this month. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, despite Korea's financial authorities laying out measures to tackle snowballing household debt, there are no signs of it slowing down. The Bank of Korea says as of the end of last month, the total amount of household loans extended by local banks came in at around $623 billion, up roughly $8 billion from July. That's the biggest monthly rise so far this year and the second highest since the central bank began compiling related data in 2008. The increase was mainly led by mortgage loans, which rose more than $5.5 billion in August from a month earlier. Apple has unveiled the iPhone 7 and the larger screen iPhone 7 Plus. They come with a faster processor, and of course, the devices offer twice as much storage as the previous model and has a number of first-time ever features. It's water-resistant, dropped the traditional headphone jack, and has updated its smartwatch, which is now equipped with GPS. Demand for the iPhone has waned in recent months, but the device continues to be the biggest source of revenue for Apple, which has sold over 1 billion units since the iPhone was launched back in 2007. The new models will debut in September 16th in the U.S., later in other parts of the world. Pre-orders for iPhone 7 and Apple Watch Series 2 will start on Friday. The Olympic spirit is still very much alive in Rio. It's now time for Paralympians to take center stage. Things got off to a roaring start with the opening ceremony, but according to our Kwon Jang-ho, concerns linger over disappointing ticket sales.
The 2016 Paralympics have begun. 18 days after the Olympics closed in Rio, the Maracanã Stadium Wednesday night was once again filled with samba music, colourful dances and elaborate fireworks, as well as some incredible somersaulting stunts by a wheelchair athlete. Over the next 11 days, 4,300 athletes from 159 countries will be competing in 23 Paralympic sports. That includes the 139 competitors from South Korea who've set a target of 12 gold medals and a top 10 finish. There are also 2 athletes representing North Korea, as well as 2 members of the refugee team competing under the Olympic flag. But as with last month's Olympics, empty seats and low ticket sales are again a big concern. The organisers have said a late upsurge in interest is expected to lead to tickets selling out, but with about 1 million of the 2.5 million tickets still available on Monday, that could likely be optimistic. Drastically reduced budgets and a shortage of volunteers threaten to disrupt the events as well. But it's hoped that, much like the Olympics last month, once the Games begin, the focus will be on athletic achievement and not the off-stage drama. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
That concludes our newscast for this hour. As always, thank you for watching.